Hi everyone, Jeanette Milio here. You made it to week 7. Let's summarize expenses versus revenues. In this module, we covered the important relationship between the revenues and expenses. Adjusting production costs to optimize the profit potential is accomplished by understanding customary fees and expenses and reducing the production costs effectively. You learn how to select the correct budget line items that can be reduced without jeopardizing the production quality. You understand the steps to take to protect the production against various production risks, including budget overages and delivery risks. Here's a few things we should consider. Reduce costs without reducing the production quality. Protect against production risk and protect against budget overages. Protect against delivery delays and protect revenues and profits. Define the optimal recoupment schedule. How do we protect against the production risk? Is by using a completion bond company insurance, which also protects us against budget overages and delivery delays. We're protecting our revenues and profits by using a collection agent. And we are defining the optimal recoupment schedule by balancing our financing sources and placing them in the waterfall in the recoupment schedule in the way they're supposed to go. So you understand who recoups when, where, why, and how. This week, you learned to differentiate between the various options to reduce the costs without jeopardizing the production quality and without jeopardizing the value of your project. You are now able to identify the various production-related risks and how to mitigate them. And you understand how to protect your revenues and optimize profits. Again, how do we do this? We're using completion bond companies and collection agents, which both protect our production-related risks, and our revenues and profits. Let's look at a few things regarding the budgeting process. Well, this is not really a budgeting class, it is a finance class, but I do want to cover a few budgeting items which I think are important for anyone who deals with entertainment finance. So we're just going to go over some general items, and if you want to learn more about budgeting, you should maybe consider the line producing class that UCLA offers, which is, by the way, a great class. So the line producer establishes a budget, and that is based on the script, the shooting location, as well as the director's vision and the producer's vision, and of course the targeted talent, meaning the actors. In addition to that, we're going to look at locations, we're going to look at the genre in order to establish the scope for a film or television show. The first step is a script breakdown. A script breakdown is a thorough analysis of a script that identifies and categorizes all the elements needed to properly prepare the production process. And then we look at the shooting schedule. A shooting schedule is a project plan of each day's shooting for a film production. Everything that happens every day, every scene that's being shot, every setup that's being used, where the camera angle goes, how a scene is broken down, what cast elements are needed that day. Everything is put together in the shooting schedule, and every day is planned out very detailed. That's what the shooting schedule is. And then the budget derives from that. The film budget, of course, determines how much money will be spent on the entire film project. There are line items to be found in a budget. Line items summaries are the above the line, which usually summarize costs and all fees related to the creative talent. The below the line sections of the budget, which are direct production costs. And then there is the post-production line item summary, which deals with editing, visual effects, music, and so forth. And there are some other costs that often include insurance, completion bond, finance fees, and a few other things. Let's look at some of the most relevant budget line items. The relevant budget line items are comprised in 5 sections, and they're summarized in these 5 sections, which are the above the line, the below the line, the post-production, other costs, and the contingency. The above the line shows us all costs and fees and anything related to our creative talent, which includes the writer, the producer, the director, and the talent, and all related fees and costs. The below the line are direct production costs, including department heads, crew, equipment and rentals, locations, set design, set build, vehicles, transportation, and location permits, and so forth. Post-production often deals with costs related to editing, visual effects, music, sound mixing, color correction, titles, credits, and more. Other is a summary for insurance, completion bond costs, legal fees, finance fees, accounting, etc. Publicity often as well. Contingency is the allowance for budget overages. So the contingency is really used as a cushion for your budget if you go over in certain areas and need more money. Let's say the wardrobe department is using more money than they were estimated to or was projected to in the budgeted line items. So that would then come out of the contingency. Or maybe the set build or set design is using more money because maybe the building took longer or it needed more items. This would also come out of contingency. Imagine you are running late, the schedule is running behind, and you might now need an extra shooting day. That would also be paid out of contingency. Let's take a look at a range of customary expenses, and I should say this is a range of customary expenses I have paid, I use, and they're subject to my personal experience in working on film and television projects. Let's take a look at some of the customary fee ranges for the team, for the crew, cast, producers, distributors, rights, production, post-production, and so forth. I made a list here that shows a percentage of the budget that is allocated. Now again, this is very much depending on what kind of project you're producing, what the scope is, where you're shooting, what unions you're using, if you're not using any unions, what talents you're using. I mean, there is a lot of variation here, and I'm sharing with you the percentages I have paid in these various line items. And I have to say this because other producers might pay less or they might pay more in certain areas. So let's take a look at this. The above the line rights payments and writers payments are usually between 3 and 6%. Talent payments can be anywhere from 10 to 50% depending on what kind of talent you're engaging. The director is often between 2 and 5% of the budget, and producer fees can be anywhere from 3 to 10%. Now, I have seen movies that were suggested to me for financing where the producer fees were as high as 15%. Needless to say, that's not a good thing. This would probably be the first place that if I am financing a project like that, would start cutting. Below the line includes extras. I've seen it to be anywhere from 0.5% to 1%, depending again on the kind of project. The production stuff can be 10 to 35% of the budget, again, very much depending on the kind of project. I'm working on a project right now, which is a television show where the production staff is actually over 60%. So it really depends on what you're producing. Location, set, design, and dressing, 3 to 5%, again, very much depends on the project and the scope. Special effects I've seen anywhere from 0.5% to 5%, always subject to the kind of project you produce. So if you produce an action-driven thriller, there is a lot of special effects in there potentially, so that would obviously increase this line item. Wardrobe, I've seen from 1 to 2%. Again, I should say here, if it's a period piece or a film even set in the future, like a sci-fi, this could go up. Makeup and hair, I've seen anywhere from 0.5% to 1% of the budget. Transportation, anywhere from 1.5 to 3% of the budget. Light and sound equipment, 5 to 6%. Again, very much driven by the project. Travel and living expenses, anywhere from 0.5% to 2%. Depends also very much where you're shooting, of course. You know, if you're shooting in the south of France, it might be more expensive than if you shoot in Iowa. Post-production ranges anywhere from 15 to 30%, also very much depending on the kind of project that you're doing. Imagine if you're doing a visual effects driven project like a sci-fi or a partially animated show, the visual effects cost for that could be much higher. Other costs, distribution and marketing elements, they're often related to the delivery elements that you have, which are those that are not covered in post-production. Could also be publicity here. Then there is the completion bond fee of 2 to 4%. Now that is very much subject to your project and the risk the completion bond feels it is taking. Production insurance is usually between 0.3 and 0.5%. This could be much higher right now due to COVID. I've seen COVID expenses for film and television shows increasing the budget by 10%. Legal fees, 1 to 3% of the budget. Finance fees, I've seen anywhere from 2 to 5%. And guild bonds are agreed with the guild. So that's a negotiation situation where you would talk to the guild and find out if they require guild bonds to be paid, and if so, how much they would require, and then you would also put that in the budget. We have mentioned the completion bond a few times. Let's dive into some more details on this. Bonding your film or TV show is a whole process. It's not just a quick insurance waiver that's put on your movie or TV show and that's it. No, the completion bond company really dives deep into every aspect of your production and your budget and your schedule and your locations and your post-production and your talent, and the list goes on. They have to do that because they are obviously responsible for any budgeting overages that you would create or that would happen, and of course any delays. A completion bond company is an insurance company that insures the on-schedule and on-budget production of a motion picture or television program. It is required to have a completion bond insurance on any project which includes a bank loan in their finance plan. The completion bond company does the following. It reviews and approves the budget, shooting, and post-production schedule, as well as the production cash flow plan. It has the actors and director undergo a health screening. It reviews distribution-related agreements to look at the delivery elements. It also reviews finance agreements to understand if they are affecting any of the budgeted line items. It reviews and approves producer agreements, and it usually wants to hold back a certain portion of the producer fee. It reviews and approves the chain of title and rights agreements to make sure there is no bodies buried here somewhere in some turnaround provision. It reviews quotes in support of the budgeted line items. So when there's a budgeted line item for set design or for a certain wardrobe item, for let's say period pieces, that wardrobe items have to be maybe sewed, they would look at quotes from service providers to help with that. The bond company does need to approve the line producer and the accountant. The bond company also reviews the collection agent management agreement, and it reviews any guild agreements and related requirements if there are any applicable. Let's look at some guild regulations. These obviously only occur for film or television projects that are shot in the US and are subject to a union. Unlike many other countries in the world, the United States film industry is influenced by the guilds and unions. That includes the Writers Guild, SAG, which is the Screen Actors Guild, and the Directors Guild, as well as IATSE, which is the production guild dictating union crew rates. Rates are usually reflected in relation to the level of the budget. Producers should A, become a signatory with all guilds when preparing a film or television project that is shot in the US and involves any of the guild members. So if you have a director that is part of the DGA, you're going to have to include the DGA and apply DGA rules and regulations. When you have SAG actors, which is very likely because most actors that have that are known are SAG actors. And if you have a writer that is part of the Writers Guild of America, then the Writers Guild would be applicable as well. You don't have to have a Writers Guild writer, by the way. You could have just a great writer, but if the writer that you are using is WGA, then that guild would be involved. IATSE is the general production union that regulates the rates you're paying to union members, like your crew. And if you are shooting a union a film with union members, you're going to have to deal with IATSE. And most films, even if they're low budget, have union crew involved. What you can do is you can call IATSE and you can talk to them about a low budget film you are producing and ask them if they will allow their members to receive a lower rate. And very often the union will talk to you about this and potentially lower the rates for their members. You would contact the guilds early on to require about any kind of bond that they want. If they want you to prepay a guild bond to them, which basically helps pay their members and make sure their members are paid, that would be something to negotiate with them and to see if they would, agree to a lower amount, because it's in advance of what the guild members would be paid. So you already budgeted in your budget. It's already there because it's part of your production cash flow plan. Now here the guild is basically asking you to put that money aside, and what happens is it will sit there until the film is finished, and then that bond will release back to you. You should contact WGA, DGLIA, and SAC to require about any residuals that might be included or might be applicable to your project, because these residuals are subject to distribution of your project and they are being paid out of the recoupment corridor. What that means is it would affect the risk profile for your equity investor and likely also your junior lender. So you need to know how much residuals the guilds are thinking of charging you as an advance so that you can allocate this in your waterfall. Never make a film that involves guild members without involving the guild, because they can come and they can shut down your production. We talked a lot about feasible budgets, but how do we actually get our budget to be feasible? If faced with insufficient revenue projections from the international distribution revenues, a producer should consider reducing the production costs in areas that do not impact the quality of the production or the genre. There are a few areas that you can think about reducing and working on in order to reduce your budget that will be actually helpful and that will not affect your genre or your quality, your production quality, and also will not affect the value of your project. Here are some areas that I would like to point out to you. Of course, you want to reduce the script pages. You also want to do script changes, but let's talk about script pages first. So if you have a movie that's a 90-minute movie, that script should be 110 pages long. If it's 120, the likelihood of there being some extra pages that you can cut is pretty high. So look at your script and keep it around 110 pages max. And then look at the scenes. How many scenes do you have? And does every scene really need to be there? Is there really a validity for every single scene? And as I mentioned before, if your scene doesn't move the story forward, take it out of the script. Cut it now, because it will be cut later when you do the editing, very likely. So why spend the money on shooting it in the first place? Reduce any company moves with the crew. So try to keep your movie contained in a certain location spectrum where you can use one location to shoot many different setups, or keep it close by. So have locations that are not so far away, especially if the company move happens during a shooting day. So ideally, you don't want a company move during a shooting day. You want to keep your crew at the same place for the day, not move that day and maybe have them show up the next day on a different location. Reduce the shooting days. If you reduce script pages and you reduce your scenes and you reduce company moves, you can reduce shooting days, because in essence, you are reducing time by doing these three other things. And if you're doing the three other things and you're reducing shooting days, you're now making your picture, your film or your TV show more efficient, because you're using less days. Every shooting day means you have 100 people on set that need to be paid. So if you can reduce shooting days, bubble, bubble, slubble, slubble, yeah, stumble, stumble, sorry. So if you can reduce shooting days, then you will likely save money. Reduce the number of locations, as I mentioned before. Think about a scene that you have that plays in a certain location and think about if that location is really necessary, if it's a new location for this scene. Could the scene also be shot in a location that you have already used, or can you make a location that you're using work for a different scene where you would shoot this? Reduce prep time. Now, pre-production is the most important period of your production because this is the time where you're actually preparing your entire production and you're supposed to solve all the problems that you can foresee coming up in your production. So reducing the prep time is something you only do if you are very certain that the movie will have sufficient prep time by doing that. There is something else you can do though. Not everyone has to show up on the first day of pre-production. You don't need the entire crew. You need the main people. You might need, obviously you need the director. You need the director of photography. You need your line producer. You need maybe anyone who has to do with set build in case the set has to be built. You need obviously location, but you don't need all the 100 people that are usually necessary to produce a movie. So you make it so that a majority of your crew is hired very late in the pre-production phase. You also want to use the post-production time. And it's always good to think about keeping post-production efficient because it keeps your director online and on track. If directors know they have many weeks to edit the movie, they will take many weeks to edit the movie. So it's not helpful, and I've often seen that having more time to edit the movie does not make it necessarily better because you start to question yourself, you start to reinventing the wheel, and it's not always a good thing. So sometimes it's good to have your director on a very tight editing schedule to finish the movie, give you the director's cut, and then you as a producer go in and do your producer's cut. Reduce visual effects if you can. Now, if this is a very visual effect driven movie and you need a lot of assets to be built, then of course you can only reduce it so much, but you can think about which visual effects are useful and are there some you can actually physically shoot. Do you need all these visual effects shots? So really go through your shot list and decide what you actually need, and then talk to the visual effect company and have them give you a very detailed schedule that you make them adhere to. And if they take longer, you make them responsible financially for any delays that they occur. Talk to IATSE and agree special rates and really think about getting them to agree to like a low budget schedule for you. That will help you very much in reducing your budget. Obviously, you want to think about negotiating deferments. Now, what that does, it will take money out of the budget now, but it will still have to be recouped. So it will help you in having to raise less money, but it's not going to help you in creating more profits. But it is important because deferments are often cheaper than raising the money for those deferments. Try to reduce your talent. Don't have like 100 extras in there, or don't create roles of characters you might not need. So really look at what role is important, what role do I need, are there some roles I can cut, and what about my extras? Do I need all those extras? Think about rights fee and writer's fees. If it's, for example, a writer you're dealing with that is not a WGA writer, you do have a lot of negotiation with here to negotiate their fee down. Rights fees, same thing. If it's not a WGA writer, you do not have to pay WGA minimums, and you should likely stay slightly under them. So try to negotiate that, and if it is a WGA writer, try to keep the Writers Guild minimums for their rates. Producer's fees is obviously a biggie. For you, the producer fee should be at a certain level. I would always suggest kind of the 5% range, but you're not going to be the only producer on the movie, very likely. So you need to think about very long and hard who you're paying a producer fee and what they're really bringing to the table. And is that fee really related to what they're bringing to the table, or is it maybe too much? Talent fees and perk packages is always a big thing because this is likely going to be the most expensive component in your budget. So obviously you want to get the best deal with the agent whose talent you're hiring, and you want to make sure that the perk packages, all the extra stuff that the actors want, is streamlined. So agents will ask for all kinds of things for their actors to make them feel comfortable, to have them have freedom, to have their families show up, to have boyfriend, girlfriend show up, all these things. So your job is to keep those packages mean and lean. Travel and living obviously very much has to do with where you're going. You want to really just have department heads come with you if you're shooting in a different country, especially if you're using local incentives. You want to be using local talent. Talked about extras, keep it limited. Permit and location fees. Permits, sometimes if they are done by the film offices, they have set pricing. So there's only so much you can do in that. But location fees, you can talk about. Maybe there is a location that you can use where you can offer some brand integration, some advertising for the location, something to be talked about. Definitely try to keep location fees low, and also combine locations to keep location fees low. Reduce the number of locations, as we talked about earlier. Try to keep your finance fees in check. So if there are financiers that want executive producer fees and legal fees and loan fees and interest fees and other fees, try to negotiate them down to the bare bones as low as you can. The bank will charge interest fees that they will deduct up front. We've learned about this, and there isn't much you can do with any entertainment bank because they have kind of their set fees. But pretty much anyone else, like a junior lender or equity, you can talk to them about the fees. Junior lenders have a tendency to be kind of all over the place. So there, if you can get them to agree to an interest reserve that they deduct up front, so that you don't have to deal with anything else, like no profit participation, like no extra legal fee, like no extra this, that, and the other, that would probably be good. Same for the tax incentive lender or incentive lender. Try to limit any extra stuff that they ask for, like legal fees or producer fees, which they might ask for, and limit those fees to what it should be, like a fee against the incentive that they're lending. Legal fees also a biggie. If you can do a deal with a lawyer to agree on a flat fee, that would be the goal. You don't really want to start with lawyers that ask for retainers and then an hourly rate, because that could be going on forever and you will not have any control over the legal bills that will be created here. Insurance and completion bond fee. Completion bond fees, insurance fees are what they are, and you can do a little shopping there, of course, to get the best fees. But completion bond fees are very much subject to what your movie is, where it's shot, how it's shot, if it has any risk factors in it. For example, if it's a movie that's shot on the water, under the water, in the water, those kind of things make completion bonders nervous and potentially raise the fee. But you can have a deal with the completion bond company where you say, listen, if I stay within my budget, will you give me a refund on a portion of my fee? That's something you can negotiate. Marketing and publicity is not the P&A money here. This is marketing and publicity that you discuss with your sales agent. So this is what they will ask you to pay that relates to taking your movie to the film festivals, making posters, making trailers, maybe throwing a press event, maybe having a little, gathering for the buyers. So you want to talk to them about how they want to use that money and really decide what is it used for and is it absolutely necessary. Delivery elements is also a big thing, because when you do a sales agency agreement, the delivery list is very long. So you should go through that delivery list and cut everything out that you don't need. Like when you do a television show, you don't need to deliver theatrical elements. What for? You're not going to have a theatrical distribution. So really go through that. And some of these delivery elements lists are really old-fashioned and are still dealing with 35mm prints and stuff related to that. So really ask the sales agent to update the delivery element list to what exactly is being delivered to distributors today. Music licenses are really up to the producer and director. How many known songs do they really want in the movie, and is there another way to deal with that? What can you do to reduce license fees like that? Production office and equipment. You don't need to be in fancy schmancy offices. You need a practical office where you can put everyone in. Maybe they have cubicles, and keep it simple as that. And when it comes to equipment like printers and computers and such, that you don't necessarily need to go overboard on if you ask your crew members to bring their own laptops, for example, and pay a small box fee to them, like a box rental fee. Title sequence, there are a million ways to do a title sequence. They can be very fancy schmancy, but they can also be very straightforward, or there can be no title sequence. There is a styling kind of component for your movie or your piece of content that you want to talk about with your director. You know, title sequence are important, for example, for television series that want to suggest a certain theme and a certain vibe. So that's something you want to think about it, but it doesn't have to go overboard. And there are great companies that do title sequences and only do that and do them very well, that you can negotiate a nice deal with. Catering is one where I always say, yes, you do not have to feed your crew lobster every day. You want to keep them healthy, you want to have variety, but you don't need to go overboard on the catering items. The contingency is something you're going to talk to the bond company about. Your job is to keep the contingency very low. I mean, the low you can get away with. I always ask for 5% while the bond company is asking for 10%. The problem is you have to fund that 10%. You have to raise the money for that 10%. So you need to explain to the bond company that they have to be reasonable with you and really help you to keep this contingency around the 5% mark. There is a gentle balance we have to watch when we start cutting our budget that relates to quality versus feasibility. There are a few things that are important where I would be careful to reduce them because, for example, your talent is a priority for your film project because they make the value, they dictate what your project is worth, and they are the ones helping you be profitable. So there you might have to face the fact that talent fees might be higher than they could theoretically be even higher than you're below the line. So those are important things to think about and be very careful with when you start cutting those or replacing talent because you can't afford it. The production quality also has to be kept up, and especially in relation to the genre. Production quality, I mean not just the technical quality, which obviously has to be up to par, but also anything that slows your script down. When you start, having people talk too much because you can't afford an action sequence and you just cut an action sequence out of a script. You don't want to do that. You want to be true to your genre. You want to keep the script and the pacing, fast pace in support of your genre. Obviously, you want to include all the industry standard fees and guild applicable fees in your budget, and you can only change those in support and negotiation with the guilds. There is an area like overhead, producer, admin fees, and so forth. Those I would always look at to reduce in support of the market value, meaning reduce those and optimize the market value and not touch the quality, because those fees have nothing to do with what you're going to see on screen. The production costs, when you're thinking about showing profits in the marketplace, the production costs have to stay in line with and align with the sales estimates. We mentioned this a few times. I'm going to mention it again because it's super important. If your budget is $10 million and the sales estimates are $3 million, you're going to have to cut it quite a bit or not make the movie, because clearly this is not a movie you should be making because you're totally out of touch. I'm being very facetious here and just giving you an example that is crazy, but I have to say that many times when I get projects sent to me, the budget is way above what it should be, and I always start cutting immediately, and then without even thinking about it too much, there is 30% gone. So there's always something that needs to be looked at when you look at the market value of a project in relation to the budget. And if the marketplace does not align with your film in the sense that, the script changes might not be ideal because you're changing a genre, the producer fees might be too high, the overhead fees might be too high, admin fees might be too high. Those are the things you can work with. But remember, script changes are really careful in your consideration, because you should only change the script in areas where you feel there is a scene that doesn't have a message, and there is a long-winded conversation here that could be shorter, the message could be changed, we could have a different conversation. You can go into script changes in reducing scenes as long as they don't change your genre. I think I did mention in one of the modules that I had to fire one of my directors on a movie because he rewrote the script last minute, and we had a very tension-driven film that had to do with people being on a boat the boat sinking, and around them were all white sharks that were about to be having them for breakfast. What does this guy do? He wrote the script where he put all these people on an island waiting to be rescued. I mean, this is a total different pacing. There's no ticking clock. Yes, we still have sharks, but they're in the water, and unless they start flying, they're not going to harm my people on the island. So they changed the genre. This draft changed the genre, and it became a drama all of a sudden. And I sold to my distributors an action movie, a thriller. So this didn't go very well, and the director had to leave the film because I could have never made this movie happen. The distributors would have pulled back the pre-sales, and I would have basically had to start from scratch, not to mention that the cast that I had secured would have walked because they didn't like the version the director had written. So there's a lot of things you need to watch out when you start changing the script. Really stick to things that do not change the genre. I cannot tell you enough. We have to talk about the relationship from the above the line to the below the line. You just have to know that this is a relationship the bond company is going to pay a lot of attention to, clearly, but it is also a relationship that might be a little out of whack because your talent might be very expensive. Bond companies are actually okay with that as long as you do have enough for the below the line to cover the script, to shoot the movie the way you're supposed to shoot it. That's what they're going to focus on. And they're going to not be upset with you if the relationship is below the line, I don't know, 30%, above the line, 70% kind of thing. I mean, again, I'm blowing it out of proportion here. But it is possible that your above the line is very high if you have A-level actors and you're doing a movie where you can be very feasible for the actual production cost. In summary, you want to make sure that you're staying in your genre, that you're not changing the script too much and change your genre. You want to have enough money to make a quality film or television show. Quality is very important, and the pacing is very important. You want to have enough money for cast and talent that enhances your commercial value, so don't be stingy on that. And also, just think about the audience and deliver to the audience what they want to see. And you know how much you can deliver on, meaning how much you can spend, because you're going to get sales estimates that tell you what your movie is worth. So look at it that way. Save where you can save, but don't save in areas that change the genre, change the value of your project, or change the production quality. And of course, in the end, you have to make sure that whatever budget you come up with is still bondable by the bond company. So if you're going too low and the bond company has concerns, you're going to have to up a little bit. But they will tell you exactly what area they feel need to be increased and why. So you can have a conversation with them about the exact line items that they feel uncomfortable about. We talked a lot about finance option and balancing finance option in order to optimize profits. Let's look at some options where the projections may not be as good as we want them to be. Is that then a question of us declining the film? Is it a question of us putting the film on the shelf? Are we going to move on? Or are we looking into different options and balancing finance sources and related components in order to still make the film happen and still make it profitable? So this first example here is our general finance plan, the way we have discussed it before. I just added a few things to it. So let's take a look at this. We have a budget here of $10 million. We are estimating the international distribution revenues to come in at 75% of the budget, the US to come in at 35% of the budget. So we are again at 11 million. The pre-sales are 35%. We are getting a 20% down payment from the distributor, and the bank is charging us 12% interest. The gap loan is going to be 20% of the budget, also with a 12% interest. Subsidies are 20% of the budget with a 12% interest in this case, in order to get the subsidy loan in advance of us producing the movie in a subsidized region. We're going to have a little bit of branding at 3% of the budget, and we have a music investment of 1% of the budget. So altogether, the equity would then be 30% of the budget, which is within the framework that we have talked about, just adding a few more finance components to it. So let's take a look at two more options where the estimates are not as good meaning the projected revenues are not as strong. So here we have two films where we see that both of them do not have the ideal finance criteria as we would like to see them when we see films coming to finance them. So the first one here, film 2, has only international distribution estimates at 65% of the budget. So instead of 75%, this film is supposedly generating less money from the international marketplace. We're looking at 10% less. So in combination with the US, we are now barely covering the budget, meaning we're making the movie for 10, we're generating 10 million. So on the surface of it, it's not the best deal. So what do we do here to adjust this? Additionally, the pre-sales are not as strong either. We're only having 20% pre-sales. So instead of the 35% pre-sales that we normally have, we only have 20%. So what do we need to do in order to make this film happen? What we need to do is we need to look at the subsidies and the branding. And we need to increase those two non-recoupable finance sources in order to make up for what could potentially be problematic. So if we have international sales estimates lower than we want them to be, and pre-sales lower than we want them to be, our equity would go up unless we find a way to subsidize some of this. So here what we did is we changed our shooting location to a location where we will be receiving 25% of the budget instead of 20%. And we are incorporating more branding and increase the branding to 5% of the budget. So this will help us keep the equity in the 35 to 40% range, or I should say within a range that makes sense, which is 37% here. And in that range, the equity will still be semi-protected and semi-profitable in investing in this kind of movie. But the key here is we need to adjust the subsidies and branding component in order to not have too much equity, which then would be at risk. The other option I'm looking at here for film number 3, now we have the sales agent basically telling us the film can only recoup 5% from international and still 35% from the US. So now we're making $8.5 million on a film that is $10 million. So on the surface of it, this would be a loss. Additionally, the pre-sales are coming in very low at 15%. So what do we do? So what we are doing is we're going to change the shooting location to a shooting location that is a strong one, and it's probably something where we're either going to shoot the film internationally, where shooting subsidies or subsidies in general could be a little more, or we're shooting it in a different region in the US where the subsidies are more. So here we are increasing the subsidies to 35% of the budget, and the branding is still at 5%. So with this change, we see the equity coming in at 33%, which is also acceptable. So anything under 40% is acceptable when it comes to equity. Anything above that is going to get a little tricky when it comes to recouping and generating a strong ROI. So what do we learn from this? We're learning that we're not throwing a movie away because they're not projecting on the surface of it what we want them to, but we are aware that we have to deal with the fact that they're not projecting enough. So we need to look at non-recoupable finance sources to balance what we're not seeing projected and increase the non-recoupable finance source so that we're not decreasing the profitability of our film.
Let's talk about funding and recoupment. We differentiate between two events that take place when putting together a film or television program. The two events are funding and the recoupment of a project. They must be separated in order to best understand their roles. They happen at different times. Funding happens when you put your movie together, recoupment happens after you're finished, and they're not necessarily always connected. The funding process is defined as the process that takes place before a project is produced, finalized, and delivered. In the case of a film or television project, it is the period during which the fundraising occurs in order to finance the production costs of a project. During this time, all the various finance elements are put together in accordance with the financial plan that was established for the project and would include all or most of the elements we have heard about in past modules as they relate to financing of a project.
Recoupment. The recoupment process is defined as the process that takes place after the film is produced. So that means it's finished, it's delivered, it's being shown at the festivals by the sales agent and is seen by distributors. At this point, the film and TV project is being sold through all the various markets worldwide. Worldwide distribution rights are sold through sales agents on behalf of the producer. Distribution revenues, which are the payments made by the distributors, are collected in the collection agent management account, also the KAMA. From there, the collection agent pays off loans and investments as well as fees and expenses in connection with the loans and investments, and they pay other project-related costs and fees that are contractually agreed, like distribution fees, distribution costs, deferments, and any other contractually agreed payments, including profit participations. What is a waterfall?
We've learned that the waterfall is the description of how distribution revenues are being allocated and disbursed. So it defines who gets paid what, when, and why. So here in this structure, we'll see a few options that I would like to walk through. So if we have a film that is theatrically released and P&A costs are applicable because a P&A theatrical campaign, meaning a theatrical campaign to, announce the films in the theaters, is applicable and being paid for, this cost would be recouping in first position from the domestic box office revenues. So here we are looking at P&A costs being recouped in first position from box office revenues. This will only be applicable if the film is theatrically released. And ideally, what you would want to do is you do not want the P&A costs to be recouped from the international distribution revenues. You want to keep the recoupment corridor within the box office from the US to keep the international waterfall clean, so to speak. So next in line in the recoupment position would be the collection agent with their collection fee, which is charged based on what ends up being collected in the collection account. However, the senior lender might say to you, I don't want anyone in front of me. I don't want the collection agent in front of me. I want to be in the first position, meaning the second position in this case. And I want the distributor to pay me directly and not through the collection account. And this happens quite a bit with banks. So the positions 2 and 3 might be swapped in this case. The sales agency fee would be paid in many cases after the senior loan has recouped and after the collection agent has been paid. However, if the senior lender is not a bank and might be an investor or someone who's comfortable in paying the sales agent first and paying the collection agent first, the sales fee and distribution expenses could actually jump up into position 2. It all depends on what the contractual negotiations entail. But normally you would see them here after the senior loan has recouped. And after the senior loan has recouped, the junior loan would be next in line to recoup with a premium if a premium is applicable. The junior lender always recoups after the senior lender and before the equity. So that's a position that you don't see swapping out with the senior loan, for example, or with the equity, for example. So deferments, and remember deferments are production costs that we have removed from the budget to be paid from revenues, would be recouping here after the junior loan and before the equity. And the reason why they are recouping before the equity is the equity understands these are budgeted line items that are costs that would be applicable. However, sometimes equity investors are not comfortable, especially not if the collateral is tight and revenues are not coming in as strongly or are not projected to come in as strongly. Then they would say, for example, we do not want these deferments to be paid before our investment has been recouped. So in this case, position 6 and 7 would swap. But in a normal situation where the projected revenues are what we want them to be because we are choosing the film based on investment criteria that works for the equity, in a normal situation like that, the deferments would be paid before the equity investment and the premium is paid. So the service providers would receive their payment that was originally budgeted in position 6 and would also receive any premium connected to the deferment if that is applicable. And next in line, we have the profit participation payment. So here, there isn't really a ranking anymore because profit participation is paid from revenues and everyone gets paid pro rata pari passu in connection with the contractual obligations. So everyone who is a profit participant gets paid their profit share at the same time. And that can include the producer, of course, who shares in the profit pool. So when we look at the exclusive corridors for a moment, we see that there are some corridors that are very exclusive in the sense that they will be the only ones recouping in this corridor. So for example, when the P&A recoups, no one else is recouping at the same time. When the collection agent recoups, no one is recouping alongside the collection agent. When the senior lender recoups, they also have an exclusive corridor. No one is recouping alongside them. Same for the sales agent and the junior lender. Now, if the junior lender consists, let's say, of 2 equity investors who want to share that mezzanine position, then they would share in this exclusive corridor, and they then would be paid in accordance with how much percentage they have provided. And so that would become a pro rata pari passu situation where they share a pool, if you will, in the junior position. The deferments are being shared if it is more than one, and they will then become a pro rata pari passu situation like the profit participation, where everyone gets paid in the percentage as to what they should be paid. The equity investors only share in the recoupment position if there are more than one equity investor. So if there is a pool of equity investors, they will also be sharing. And as I mentioned before, profit participation is not an exclusive corridor because everyone here is sharing, and that's what it is often seen in the profit participation component, which is basically profits paid out of net revenues. Everything else, recoupment position 1 through 7, is normally looking at an exclusive corridor and is recouping in this ranking order. You have made it to the midterm. So the midterm is due Sunday by midnight, and there won't likely be any additional key activities during this week because of the midterm. But if there is anything, you always find it, as you know, in the Canvas calendar or the announcements. And again, if you have any questions, check out the discussion board, questions and answers, or email me via Canvas so I can answer your questions swiftly, and I'm happy to. So this was our week 7, and I'm looking forward to much more to come in week 8.